Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan at MS Piers. Goodness me, so much going on in the world. I'm constantly making videos and it is time I did my geopolitics update concerning the war in Ukraine. We're going to focus to begin with on the US. Now I do get some criticism sometimes, particularly from those who might be more affiliated with the right, the centre right maybe in the US, where I focus a lot of time on criticising the Trump administration because of what they're doing with regard to Ukraine. And I should be equally focusing on, well, okay, but shouldn't Europe be doing more? You need to be criticising Europe too. And I get that point. That is perfectly valid. I would argue at the moment that Europe is actually standing up, and we're going to come to that. So the second half of this video is, you know, all those, the tabs in the pink tab group at the top there will all be on Europe, and there is a lot to go through, essentially. There's even more to go through than with the US. But the problem is, the reason why the US takes up a lot of my focus is, A, it's supposed to be, you know, the beacon of liberty and democracy, and it's sliding towards autocracy and seeming to be getting into bed with Russia at the same time. And I find that geopolitically really dangerous. Like from a macro point of view, this warrants an awful lot of A, criticism, B, analysis. It is deeply concerning that so many people appear to be saying incredibly pro-Russian things, and there is no movement from say Trump with regard to supporting Ukraine. In fact, we're just going to hear from him again. This is just out now, where he kind of both sides it yet again. And so you're thinking, that's deeply frustrating. Because why is it frustrating? The US has the biggest armed forces in the world, and it has the most kind of excess capacity and the greatest ability to help Ukraine, both in terms of military assistance and financial assistance, arguably, but also in terms of sanctions and secondary sanctions. The US is in a position where it could be the end of Russia like that. Like if we'd had 4 months of really hardcore pressure on Russia, this war could already be coming to an end, but it's not. Instead, I think the positioning of the US, like bizarrely enough, because they complain about this being a long war and he seems to want a really quick resolution, but he's actually extending the law, prolonging it more painfully. By not helping Ukraine, the war goes on and both sides get hammered hugely. If you help Ukraine, Russia would get hammered far more than Ukraine, and the war would end sooner. So it's just an absolutely counterproductive position from Donald Trump. So I do focus a lot on the United States, but I think it requires it. So the question is, okay, is Europe coming up with the goods? And we'll come to that later. Right, let's start with this, which is Trump has just been in a presser where he said the following: it is typically Trumpian. There's nothing different. When he's got an opportunity to slag off Russia, he goes for the both sidesism approach and has to have a go at Ukraine as well. You know, have a go at the victim.
Light blue.
Thank you, Mr. President. How close are you to step back between Ukraine and Russia? We see a very bad escalation. Are you going to leave it in the hands of the Europeans?
I'm very close to the situation. I'm very disappointed in Russia, but I'm disappointed in Ukraine also.
I'm disappointed in Russia, but I can't just focus on them, so I'm disappointed in Ukraine as well.
Because I think deals could have been made, and you know, we're losing 5,000-6,000.
So just to let you know, from this, if you break down exactly what he says, I'm disappointed in Russia, but I'm also disappointed in Ukraine. And then he expands on why he's disappointed in Ukraine, but doesn't expand on why he's disappointed with Russia. So yet again, we have the leader of the free world, effectively, you can tell just by reading between the lines here, that he is more aligned to Russia. He's more wanting to criticize Ukraine than he is wanting to criticize Russia. It is just in his DNA.
1,000 people a week, soldiers mostly, but also people living in towns because they're getting hit by missiles again. How'd you like to live in a building and you think a missile has a good chance of hitting your building during the evening? It's horrible. Must be horrible to live like that. But, I mean, we'll get it, but it's, I'm disappointed that it's not done. Light blue.
So again, you know, 5,000-6,000 people dying a week, and you know, it talks about people, civilians, in buildings, and you wouldn't like to be in those buildings. So we do start seeing a little bit of empathy there going on for civilians, and that's really important. But this is woefully inadequate. And he says, I'm very close to knowing what's going on. I don't think he really has much of a clue about what's going on, either militarily, operationally, or just geopolitically, and understanding the jigsaw puzzle, the geopolitical jigsaw puzzle, that is the world. I think he sees things in a very simplistic manner. Okay, so the US, again, if we can read between the lines with the words say of the president here. So he says these things. Let's just parse apart that sentence, work out what's kind of going on in his mind, why he says these things. We can also parse what is going on in terms of personnel and events and kind of unpick things. So Bridget Brink was the ambassador to Ukraine. She resigned. Actually, it's not so much about subtle parsing of things. She was pretty bloody overt and explicit about it. She resigned because of the foreign policy of the Trump administration. So when you have the person arguably in the greatest position to understand the relationship between the United States and Ukraine, the relationship between the United States and Russia and the war in Ukraine, it's going to be the ambassador to Ukraine, the US ambassador to Ukraine. She resigned, hasn't been replaced as far as I can work out. We have the US ambassador to Russia now leaving their post, according to the embassy. Now, I don't know why this is, but I'll tell you what, if I was ambassador to Russia, knowing how difficult a job that would be, but also knowing exactly what Russia was, and I have freaking Secretary of State Marco Rubio announcing congratulations to the people of Russia today, as he did, because it's National Russia Day, I would be like, really? Is that where we're at now? Are we just so overtly palling up with the Russians that... Anyway, so the ambassador to Russia's gone. The US embassy said the ambassador Lynn Tracy is, quote, concluding her mission at the US embassy in Russia without providing any further details. But reading between the lines here, this is not looking good, is it? Okay, then we have Marco Rubio giving, and I did that breaking news update this morning, I'm not going to read it out again, is deeply, deeply embarrassing that the Secretary of State is saying what he said in terms of congratulating the Russian people today. As Mr. Rubio has kindly informed us earlier today, it is Russia Day. I prepared several facts of what Putin's rule has brought Russia to in the past 25 years. So Anton Gerashenko, I'm just going to throw this in here. It's not so much to do with the US, but it's a nice little counter to Marco Rubio's absolutely sickening statement from on behalf of the United States. So finances. The Russian government plans to revise the federal budget for 2025, increasing the deficit by 250%. From $12 billion to $42 billion. That's a deficit. Multiplying it by quite a lot there. The official inflation rate is supposedly 7.6%, but according to estimates by the Foreign Intelligence Service, real inflation in Russia already exceeds 20%. According to US Department of Defense, Russia has spent at least $250 billion on the war against Ukraine since the start of the full-scale invasion. Russia's economic losses from the war and sanctions are around $1.3 trillion. At the same time, according to the Federal State Statistics Service, 12.6 million Russians were living below the poverty line in 2024, but Putin does not care about the standard of living in Russia. Demographic decline and huge losses on the front lines since the full-scale invasion. According to various estimates, between 650,000 and 1.3 million Russians have left the country. More than 1 million have been killed and injured in the war. Russia has been flooded with criminals who received amnesty for participating in the war in Ukraine. Crime levels have risen dramatically in Russia. Due to sanctions, Russia has lost its rich Western markets and it's forced to sell oil to China and at bargain prices. Currently, Russian oil is sold in the ports of Primorsk and Novorossiysk for approximately $47 to $49 a barrel, which is significantly lower than the budgeted figure of $69.7 a barrel. As a result, Russia's annual oil and gas revenues could fall by about 30% or $30 to $40 billion, which is almost equal to the entire Russian budget deficit for the current year. So that's how important the oil and gas prices are, right? The Russian army has long lost its status as the second in the world and has turned into a bunch of looters and criminals. Cannon fodder that is thrown into battle in a forest area near another destroyed Ukrainian village. The Navy, Ukrainian drones and missiles are methodically turning the Black Sea Fleet into an underwater fleet. Moreover, recently the Security Service of Ukraine blew up the Crimean Bridge for the third time. Space, in 2024, Russia launched only 17 rockets into space. By comparison, the US launched 152 rockets and China 65. A place in the top three with a score of 17 is a little consolation, especially considering that New Zealand launched 13 rockets in 2024. Under international sanctions, Russia cannot purchase expensive microchips and other necessary equipment. Since the beginning of 2025, more than 17 attacks have been carried out on oil depots and refineries in Russia in 2024. Ukrainian drones attacked oil refineries and fuel depots in Russia, annexed Crimea, and occupied territories of Ukraine at least 81 times. The SBU has struck 4 strategic airfields in different regions of Russia with drones. Total losses of enemy aircraft amount to 41 units, including A-50s, 295s, 22s, 160s, and AN-12 Il-78 aircraft. The operation weakened Russian strike capabilities by 20 to 30%, and military experts around the world commenting on the SBU's operation called the actions of Putin's FSB, which allowed everything to happen right under its nose, one of the biggest failures in the history of the Russian special services. And then you get all those Russian cemeteries. And so things are not looking good for Russia, even though, it's easy to see that it's all doom and gloom for Ukraine. In fact, there are some saying that Ukrainian forces are looking okay in a number of places. Yes, they're conceding territory, but as long as they do that in an operational withdrawal, organized kind of fashion, then bleeding the Russians dry is a fair deal. And in fact, there are claims now. Zelensky's come out today and said that the Ukrainians are pushing back in Sumy and starting to clear the Russians out of villages there. So we'll have to see if that pans out. But it's frustrating because Russia are in this precarious situation, and the US lifted that boot off the neck. Now, to avoid and then here we come to more of the same. So we just had a little interlude, that's the word. We just had a little interlude with a bit of here are how Russia are, but we're going to get back to the US doing and saying ridiculous things, geopolitically speaking, or here enforcing, say, the G7 to forego a joint communique at next week's summit in Canada. So Bloomberg reports that to avoid conflict with Trump, they're not going to have a joint communique because, it's too uncomfortable to say Russia are the bad guys, that Russia have invaded Ukraine and they are the aggressors, and G7 need to stand strong with Ukraine. That's far too controversial. Instead, the leaders are expected to issue separate statements on key topics, a move aimed at easing tensions. It's just so frustrating. Now, the US feels apparently pretty comfortable about the possibility of a peaceful resolution to the war, according to Trump's special envoy, Keith Kellogg. This is a bit weird because actually we're going to just see a little bit of contradiction coming here, according to the Wall Street Journal, but nevertheless, let's continue here. So this is Keith Kellogg.
The Ukrainian term sheet. Then we got what's called the Russian term sheet.
So, sorry, I missed the beginning. Here it goes.
The Ukrainian term sheet. Then we got what's called the Russian term sheet. They call it a memorandum. And we put them together. And we said, okay, how can you meld these two documents together to get to an end state? And we are pretty comfortable right now. We know what that looks like. We know what an end state could look like, should look like, and if we can just get to that point, we think it's winnable. Winnable meaning you can get to a peace agreement.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to say win. I didn't mean to say Ukraine are going to win. Oh, no. It's not winnable. Sorry. We're just going to get to peace.
And that's where you really want to get to.
Could you share a little bit more on this end state that you've been mentioning? How does it look like?
Yeah. Well, when we talk about it, the term sheet, we talk about I call it a comprehensive ceasefire. Comprehensive means air, land, sea, infrastructure. We call it ceasefire in place. Ceasefire in place meaning the ground you are physically on, that is the ground that is yours now. You occupy that. We want to get to the return of the children, the prisoners that are out there, and then try to get the Russians back into what I would call the League of Proper Nations. So everybody's kind of working together. You kind of balance it out, meaning you can all live with the results of this for the long term.
In other words, we just want Russia back into the fold. So he's saying we're pretty comfortable about the possibility of a peaceful resolution. Just listen to the language there. We are pretty comfortable about the possibility of a peaceful resolution, rather than I am going to resolve this in one day, arguably before my inauguration, which is what Trump said. We're now 4 months later and we're still talking about, pretty comfortable about a possibility of a peaceful resolution. It's like Trump needs to be held account for his claims. He needs to be held to account for his claims, but he isn't. Like his own media do the square root of naffle to hold him to account. Like the White House press room is just a bit of a joke these days with YouTube influencers and whatnot on the sidelines asking Caroline Leavitt gimme questions, and Trump, as soon as he gets a difficult question, says, "I'm not. Are you from ABC? Are you from CNN? I'm not speaking to you. You're rubbish." Like, so he never gets difficult questions, and then Fox just absolutely, they just give him, I don't know, media fellatio on a daily basis, and then no one in the ecosystem that MAGA exists in hear any kind of pushback on Trump or these people. But he said he's going to solve it in one day, and he frickin' hasn't, and it's been an abject failure. The Russia policy, it's been a complete success for Russia. It's been an abject failure for anyone who's interested in, I don't know, decent moral outcomes and geopolitical strategic outcomes that would actually be long-term beneficial for the US, rather than these short-term transactional ideas that I think Trump is concerning himself with. Keith Kellogg outlined a plan for a ceasefire in Ukraine, which envisages the consolidation of the current positions on the parties de facto without legal recognition. We want to achieve a ceasefire on current positions. Whoever stands where, that territory is behind them. That is not a legal recognition, but the de facto then, the return of children, prisoners, and sustainable truce, beneficial not only to Ukraine, but also to Europe. Also the return of Russia to the civilized community so that everyone can live with these results in the long term. We do not want a new war in 3 to 5 years. So, okay. And at the same time, the Wall Street Journal reports that peace talks are deadlocked and the fate of the Ukraine war is to be decided only on the battlefield. Russia seeks to make enough progress on the front lines to force Kyiv to agree to its demands. That seems to be what Russia is intent on doing, and we've heard it from the Russian negotiators themselves, people like Medinsky and Lavrov and so on and so forth. They are telling us very clearly what they think. Dmitry Medvedev is just spouting his maximalist rhetoric consistently. We know what Russia want because they tell us. So this idea that they're still, we're close to this agreement, we've got, we are pretty comfortable about the possibility of a peaceful resolution. Dude, they are telling you they're not interested. They're telling you that they want these maximalist objectives achieved, and they're pushing on the front lines as much as they physically can. I think they're overstretching, and there could be an element of the Russian lines, really running out of enough momentum and people and material, but how many times have we thought that would happen? Ukraine wants to inflict enough damage to convince Kremlin that the price of reneging on the deal is too high. This is where really it's got to come down to economic pressure on Russia first and foremost. I really do think, I know some people say no, that it has to be on the battlefield. I think what happens on the battlefield comes on the back of an economic collapse for Russia, and that can happen if the US was fully on board with sanctions, and if that Blumenthal-Graham bill got through Congress and was signed off by the president, Russia would be in all sorts of trouble. So a key element of Moscow's latest offensive is the eastern Ukrainian city of Konstantinivka, a vital logistical hub on the edge of the front line. Earlier this year, Russia began shifting troops that had been attacking Pokrovsk, a city further south, towards Konstantinivka. I said exactly that in my last frontline update of this morning. And the recent attacks on Chasiv Yar and Pokrovsk have shown that Russia is willing to waste troops, weapons and time trying to capture cities, even if they are of little strategic importance. The Battle of Konstantinivka is likely to be just as brutal and protracted. I fully agree. Like, Russians are on a hiding to nothing here. They are going to exhaust them if they really tried to take Konstantinivka and Pokrovsk, which they could well do. But the cost for the Russians in doing so, I think, would be disastrous. Okay, so then moving on, I did that whole breaking news update yesterday of Tulsi Gabbard's insane video, which just blew my mind. Of her, some people are saying she's actually got Iran in mind, but the whole Iran-Israel thing that's flashed up today, I don't think is what she was planning to talk about, because she planned a trip to Hiroshima to go and visit there to do all this high quality recording, come back and then put this all together in a highly slickly produced video. And I really think this is about Russia and, I mean, it could be about both, right? But I really think it's Russia and Ukraine. I know many people saying Iran, but I think that's just happens to have popped along. I mean, it's always been bubbling there, right? These issues with Iran and Israel, but I don't know. Anyway, she's then given this like pro-Russian, anti-nuclear escalation video, which I think is absolutely terrible. And of course, RT have jumped on it. So Sean Pinner says Russian state TV is now airing the intelligence asset Tulsi Gabbard warning of nuclear Armageddon, sprinkled with Kremlin buzzwords like globalists and elites, all while serving Putin, the billionaire, with mansions, yachts, and aqua disco room complete with stripper pole. So RT here in the tweet says, says political elites and warmongers foment fear and tensions between nuclear powers, confident they will have access to nuclear shelters. The quote from DNI Tulsi Gabbard. We're closer to nuclear annihilation than ever before, she warns. No one has to live in fear of nuclear holocaust. These are all Russian talking points, so they're happy to excerpt those quotes from the overall video and throw them out into their social media. Tulsi Gabbard is doing a job for Russia today. Tulsi Gabbard, therefore, is doing a job for the Kremlin. The American White House is compromised. Putin is inside Trump's head. Putin is inside Gabbard's head. Putin is inside, you can complete the list there. On the other hand, the people we really want we want all American politicians to have a firm grasp on what's going on. It's really good that Pastor Mark Burns has come back as a right-wing, a real staunch Republican, conservative Christian, someone I have very little in common with, right? Has gone up to Ukraine, changed his views on Ukraine, and has now come back and he's shouting about Ukraine a lot. And this is brilliant because he's your best, well, not him personally, but those kind of people who exist in the right-wing ecosystems, your JP Lindsley's of the world. These are the people that are going to shift thoughts, shift thinking and ideology in the MAGA information spaces. So Pastor Mark Burns comes back and says, look, I'm speaking at Hudson Institute in Washington, D.C. to advocate for peace and prevent World War III. Supporting Ukraine is America first. If we don't help stop Russia now, we'll pay a far higher price later in both American dollars and American lives. We are part of NATO. If Russia overruns Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia and the Baltic states are next. The moment he touches a NATO country, Article 5 obligates us to respond not just with weapons, but with US soldiers on the battlefield. Our enemies are building up. If we fail to act now, we'll be forced to send our sons and daughters to fight and die in a much larger war. No one wants that except the warmongers. We are closer to World War III than most realise. Let's stop it before it starts. Yes, in other words, America first is supporting Ukraine. That is the approach that is really needed. That it has to come from Pastor Mark Burns, no disrespect, but that should be coming from, yes, Lindsey Graham is saying stuff like that, but it's not getting through. I hope this gets through. There need to be more voices on the MAGA right that are saying the same thing. And David D is interesting because he's someone I often use as a source. He's very, very pro-Ukraine, former military man, and a very staunch Republican. But as I showed you today, that Marco Rubio statement congratulating the Russians on Russia Day was the straw that broke the camel's back. He said, I've been a Republican for 30 years, no more. So there are people who are willing to stand up for what's good and right first, rather than have political ideology first and tribalism first. So here, David D says, so far the Trump administration has or is planning to. So this is someone from a military point of view that is actually come to the point where I'm going to list some of the military issues that are happening as a result of Trump. So far, the administration has or is planning to cut the F-35 program 50% next year, cut 11 brigades, cut all new light armoured ground vehicles, cut the M10, cut any new AH-64s, I think they are the Apache helicopters, cut Coast Guard cutters, end of most of the NATO training with the USA, deactivation of the V Corps, removing troops from Korea and Europe, slashing funds for overseas bases that we need, push forward the POS new rifles that have issues and are too heavy, push the F-47, so this is a new stealth fighter jet, that's sixth generation jet that he's pushing, F-47 for Trump being the 47th president. It's not ready and probably will not be for at least 10 years. Push the Golden Shower Dome, that will cost over $1 trillion and will not work for everything it's being promised for. This is setting up the USA as for a bunker mentality where the world burns and we hope that no one hits us. The fact is we need Europe and Asia, and making them enemies will hurt us in just a few years. That last sentence is, or those last two sentences are the key here. What we're seeing is this isolationist approach of bringing the US back from interacting with the rest of the world, then treating Europe, say, as an enemy rather than an ally. He never says nice things, Trump, about democratically elected leaders, but says lots of nice things about Kim Jong-un, Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, Viktor Orban, all these people who want the downfall of Europe and the European Union, all these people who are vying for imperialistic gains around the world. That's who Trump likes. He wants to be one of them. He's looking at, on the one hand, an isolationist, as in not working with allies, but working against other empires, carving up the world in that way. But that's not the best way to go about, forging a future for the United States. As David D says, we need Europe and Asia, and making them enemies will hurt us in just a few years. And that's kind of like Pastor Mark Burns there. America first is supporting Ukraine. Now, Ukrainians are apparently among foreign nationals in the US targeted for transfer to Guantanamo. So the Washington Post is reporting that Guantanamo Bay is going to be a place where not just kind of Latinos, but actually Europeans, Ukrainians, these people who are going to be deported. What's happening is people with TPS and protected status within the US it's looking like there are lots of rumors and talk of shifting protected status to then bring legally protected immigrants into non-legal status, like that don't have a right. Then you're just changing the rules. Now all of you don't have a right to exist here, we're going to arrest you and send you away. So the detainees reportedly include individuals from countries such as the United Kingdom, France, Germany, and Ukraine. The move is part of a broader plan to free up capacity at overcrowded domestic facilities. So that's a worry. Then we hear that the Pentagon has launched a review to decide if the US should scrap AUKUS. AUKUS is the Australia, United Kingdom, and US tripartite agreement on security, particularly in the domain of submarines. Making submarines together, it's all going to be about sharing knowledge and capacity and so on and so forth. Now, Adam Kinzinger says, what in God's name is wrong with America? We are such sissies now, scared of each other, scared of other countries, scared of China. Trump is a scared weak boy. Obviously, he's not a fan of him anymore. So the Pentagon's launching this review of the 2021 AUKUS submarine deal with the UK and Australia to determine if the US should scrap the project. According to Financial Times, ending the submarine and advanced technology development pact would destroy a crucial pillar of security cooperation between the allies. And again, just what David D was saying, you start, okay, it might not be making the UK and Australia enemies, but it's not keeping them close as friends. It's actually pissing them off, saying, yeah, screw you, we had a deal with you guys, yeah, screw you, whatever, pushing that into long grass and going much further into an isolationist positioning. But of course, then you'll have the UK and Australia say, well, we're not going to buy any of your stuff now. Will Australia buy Abrams tanks when they renew their tank fleet, and so on and so forth? This is then playing into the French. So Australia scrapped a deal with the French to provide submarines for France before AUKUS. AUKUS came along, they scrapped the France deal. That really, really annoyed the French. But it could well be that we have a fork, where it's like France, Australia, UK. And that fork deal is a kind of two fingers up to the US, say, well, we're going to make these things ourselves. France has, technical know-how with regard to submarines. And, I'm sure that would be, as a nuclear power as well as the UK being a nuclear power, you can see it might make a great fit, right? And it could bring the UK closer to our European neighbours. and the US loses out again. Then we have, what do we have here? This is Mike Turner, who used to sit on was he chair of the Intelligence Committee before he was kicked off basically by Trump as a Republican. So this is Republican Representative Mike Turner tries to help Hegseth out, Pete Hegseth, when he's just being questioned by Congress as a Secretary of Defense, by getting him to confirm that the Pentagon doesn't in fact have plans to invade Greenland take Greenland by force. But Hegseth instead more or less testifies that, yep, they have devised plans for taking Greenland.
Lawyer here, I just want to help you out because people try to twist your words. You are not confirming in your testimony today that at the Pentagon there are plans for invading or taking by force Greenland, correct? That is not your testimony today.
All my testimony is that the Pentagon has plans for any number of contingencies.
It is not your testimony today that there are plans at the Pentagon for taking by force or invading Greenland, correct? Because I'm sure as hell hope that it is not your testimony.
We look forward to working with Greenland to ensure that it is secured from any potential threats.
Excellent. I yield back.
Wow. So he does, in fact, from any potential threats other than us, we can be the threat. But yeah, in other words, there are plans afoot for taking Greenland. It's just incredible. And then Timothy Milovanov here says, The Economist, he's summarizing The Economist, reporting that Taiwan no longer counts on America to defend it. For decades, Taiwan's plan was simple: survive 1 month of Chinese attacks until US forces arrive. And now, after Trump's stance on Ukraine, Taiwan is planning for a lonelier, longer war. Taiwanese officials fear Trump's message is small countries shouldn't expect help. It hits close to home. He's mocked Taiwan's ability to fight China before and said little about risking US lives to defend it. China has studied Russia's failure in Ukraine. They now believe Taiwan must be crushed fast before the world can intervene. But Taiwan is flipping the script. Delay China, outlast the blitz by time. At the Taiwan Trilateral Forum in Berlin, a senior official said Taiwan must prove to the world that it can fight long enough, hold out while China's legitimacy collapses and allies mobilize. This shift is reshaping society. Taiwan is stockpiling food, fuel and medicine. Civil drills train the population to function during siege or blackout. President Ching-te live streams meetings to prepare civilians mentally and logistically. The TSMC produces over 90% of the world's advanced semiconductors. A Chinese blockade, even without bombing, could halt chip making by cutting off rare gases and chemicals. The global supply chain hangs on Taiwan's ability to endure. Taiwan now shares resilient strategies with Israel and Finland. Both nations have deep civil defense systems. Their lessons help Taipei prepare without provoking China. One topic remains taboo: planning resistance under occupation. Some experts say it's defeatist. Others point to Ukraine. Survival requires preparation before the enemy crosses the line. Interesting stuff there, and very worrying to see, again, the US moving away from supporting these other nations around the world. Okay, remember, I say that should be in the US's interest. Is not just about being world police. That's completely wrong understanding of what the US would be doing. Right, now we're moving on to Europe, and okay, the criticism against me is, oh, well done. Okay, so you've just had a go at the US again, but I think I'm justified. I think it's not like none of that is complete nonsense or disinformation. That's stuff that's happening. That's things that Trump is saying. That's things that Marco Rubio is saying. That's things that Tulsi Gabbard is saying. Okay, so that is happening. Okay, brilliant. But what about Europe? What are they doing? And some might say, well, not enough, not quickly enough. And yet there is that. Difference is that Europe is like 30 countries with all different agendas and different budgets and domestic issues. You got the EU working together, 27 member states, with a couple of people being very difficult, like our friends Fitzo and old Orban over there. And then you have like sideline issues like, Poland having a president who's like EU skeptic. And then you got Marine Le Pen hanging around, and you got all sorts of issues going on the AfD. So it's difficult, right, to move this juggernaut in a really reactive, quick manner. But actually things have been put in place. The rearm Europe with 150 billion euros on the cards, possibly rising to 800 billion. You do have a mobilization of the defense industries in Europe. It is slow. These things have been slow, too slow, but it is happening. And Europe is standing up. So Germany seems to be coming to the fore. Now, Friedrich Merz, or Boris Pistorius, the defense minister, has announced today that no, they're not considering sending the Taurus. Okay, whoop-de-doo. But other things are happening. And Germany today announced another 1.9 billion euros of assistance to Ukraine on top of the 7 billion for this year. So that's 8.9 billion as opposed to the US is 0 billion in terms of new aid. All that's coming through is already contracted aid, right? So, and then that's Germany. Then we can look to the UK, and all of this is adding up, right? And look at like the Baltics and the Nordic states. Like Norway's giving like, what is it, 7 billion this year? 8 billion is it? You've got obviously the UK as well. You've got Sweden giving significant amounts. Finland. You've got Poland as well helping out hugely. You've got France thrown in there, and so on and so forth. All of these are infinitely higher than the material support from the US this year. Since Trump has come in, zero, or maybe there was 50 million of something that was given, but he's not even allowing stuff to be sold to Ukraine at the moment. So yeah, Europe are kind of trying to step up, and they are succeeding to some degree. Here's a statement from Chancellor Merz. You remember 5 weeks ago I launched the initiative in Kyiv together with other European leaders, aiming to achieve diplomatic success in reference to opening up peace talks with Russia. This has not been achieved. Russia is not willing to discuss the end of the war in Ukraine. Okay, so we plan to do some things. It hasn't really come about. US hasn't really played ball. So therefore, we are doing now what has previously been announced. There will be more sanctions. The EU Commission made proposals yesterday. Next week, these might be already issued in Brussels, targeting Russian banks and the Russian energy sector. The answer is clear. We support Ukraine militarily, and we will take more measures against Russia. So it is happening. Like Europe is doing so. I'm not trying to be a big cheerleader for Europe here, but like the data is there. Like the European Commission has proposed an 18th package of sanctions against Russia, and they've only just done a 17th package of sanctions, right? So that's 2 sets of sanctions within like weeks of each other. That's incredible. These things take an awful lot of thought and work to produce, right? And the US has 0 packages. We heard from Scott Bessent, asked by Senator Coons in Congress, how many entities have you added? How many Russian entities have you added to the sanctions list since January the 20th? And Scott Bessent said, well, I'll have to get back to you on that. And Senator Coons said, I'll tell you, it's 0. 0. You have done precisely nothing. So again, we've got another package coming from the European Commission here, targeting energy and banking sectors. The Commission promised banning transactions with Russia's Nord Stream gas pipelines, as well as banks that engage in sanctions circumvention, according to the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. They also proposed lowering the oil price cap from $60 to $45 a barrel. And so I hear that's without the US as well, adding that an additional 77 vessels of the Russian Shadow Fleet are proposed to be added to the 342 already listed. The Commission also proposed to transform the existing prohibition to the use of the SWIFT system, so that's a bank payment system, into a full transaction ban, apply such a ban to another 22 Russian banks, and extend it to financial operators in third countries that finance trade to Russia in circumvention of sanctions. That is what I'm talking about, right? That is what we need to be hearing from the US. So yes, I keep criticizing the US. Oh, but what about the Europe? What are they doing? Actually, they're doing things. The EU approves new tariffs on Russian and Belarusian agricultural goods. The measures target those agricultural goods that have not yet been subject to additional customs duties and will enter into force on July the 1st. So, again, more action being taken here. Here we have just a bit more detail. These measures target those goods that have not yet been affected. The step comes as the EU readies additional sanctions against Russia and continues to wage its all-out war against Ukraine. That's Russia. Polish presidency motto is Security Europe, and these measures increase our economic security by reducing dependencies from Russia, said Michał Baranowski, the Trade Undersecretary at the Polish Economy Ministry. We are further reducing Russia's export revenues and therefore its ability to finance a brutal war. This is united Europe at its best, he said in a statement. The new tariffs will apply to goods that made up around 15% of all agricultural imports from Russia in 2023. Fertilizer tariffs will focus on certain nitrogen-based products, the Council said in a statement. Russian fertilizers accounted for more than a quarter of all EU's imports in this sector in 2023, worth almost $1.5 billion. Apart from stifling Russia's trade revenue, the step also aims to reduce the EU's dependence on Russian and Belarusian goods, protect European farmers and diversify the supply. So the EU adopted higher tariffs on cereals, oilseeds and other products from Russia and Belarus in May 2024, and earlier this year the European Commission proposed imposing similar measures on all remaining agricultural products from the two countries. Things are happening. Lindsey Graham, from an American point of view, says, I'm very pleased that our European partners through the EU Commission are levelling a new round of sanctions against Russia for the barbaric invasion of Ukraine. This round is different because it is going after Chinese companies that prop up Putin's war machine. Without China and India buying 70% of Russian oil, Putin's war machine would come to a grinding halt. These sanctions on Nord Stream 1 and 2, the now non-operational German pipelines meant to carry Russian gas, are extremely significant. The decision to lower the Russian oil price cap from $60 to $45 will hit Putin hard in the wallet. Well done to our European allies. So again, to Jeff Eder, so thank you for your statements. Thank you for your support over the course of the war, of course. But I know if you are aligned to the Republicans, if you're a Republican supporter generally, then it gets very difficult if I'm just criticizing the GOP day after day after day, just having to go at Trump. But come on, yeah, you change your record. And it feels like I'm beating you personally because all of our identities get entwined with what we believe, and especially political identities, is very tribal. So even if you don't like Trump particularly, maybe you're a more of a Reagan Republican, you're still going to have your affinities with the existing GOP. And if some upstart Brit Egypt comes along and starts banging on about like the GOP time and time again, it gets tiring and you get annoyed, and you can't help but feeling upset with me because I'm just doing that all the time without, maybe being as analytically critical or critically analytical about Europe. But actually, I genuinely think Europe is not perfect, and it is slow, but it's always going to be a bit slow with Europe working with all these member countries. That's democracy. That is the disadvantage of democracy. China can do things pretty damn quickly, and so can Russia. They're dictatorships, right? Europe is a bit different, but things are happening, and fingers crossed, it will have an effect. Now, Roman Sheremetyev here says Russia won't end Ukraine war until NATO pulls out of the Baltics. This is what happens when weakness invites aggression. Trump's cowardice and his appeasement of Russia have emboldened Putin. Now he's setting his sights on the Baltics. And by the way, that first sentence was a quote from a Newsweek article that, Russia won't end the Ukraine war until NATO pulls out of the Baltics. But that's, again, you go back to what I was saying about the Americans, you're expecting peace, but this is what Russia's telling you. Russia's saying this stuff. Just listen to them. Just like the Munich Agreement in 1938, when Neville Chamberlain handed Hitler Czechoslovakia for the illusion of peace in our time, for our time, we are once again watching history repeat itself. Appeasement didn't stop Hitler, it encouraged him. Czechoslovakia was only the beginning. World War II followed. Putin has learned the lesson well. Threats work. The West caves, and with Trump's signals of retreat, Russia sees a green light. And here's a terrifying truth: Putin could pause his offensive in Ukraine, redeploy 20% of his forces, and overrun the Baltics in weeks. This isn't the broken Russian army of 2022. It's adapted, rearmed, and learned. Unless the West wakes up, we may soon be in World War III. Okay, so that's a pretty scary view of what's going on. Chancellor Merz was speaking to a bipartisan group of senators in Congress when he was visiting the White House, visiting Washington the other day, and said that the Russians are rearming at an alarming rate. You see all the building near Finland. I think Ukraine are doing a really good job of trying to stop that by hitting the military-industrial complex and all these different facilities. But Russia is trying its hardest to arm itself, is having the support of China. Do not be complacent about how weak Russia is. Always assume the worst. Tendar here saying, according to the Levada Center, Russians consider the following 5 nations the most hostile nations. So Germany, 55%, UK, 49%, Ukraine, 43%, USA, 40%. Imagine this survey being done in the 1970s, in the height of the Cold War. The USA would be way up there. The USA in 4th, 40%. The USA are not seen as the enemy anymore. That is what Trump has done. I wonder what percentages would have been there 2 years ago in the middle of the Biden administration. I really do. Now Germany and the UK always seen like as bad guys. The Kremlin loves to blame us. But Germany now up there. And of course, why? Because Friedrich Merz's come along and he's up the ante, and he's rhetorically at least, and also with money, supporting Ukraine even more than Olaf Scholz's government. And Poland there at 37%. So fascinating survey. Now, Steve Rosenberg, the BBC correspondent in Moscow, said in today's Russian papers, although I think this was yesterday, the Russian economy is displaying, this is a quote, the Russian economy is displaying alarming symptoms. You hear talk of stagnation, recession, plus sales of residential real estate plummet 40%, less trade between Russia and China, etc., etc., etc. So just to give you a little sense that Russia is in economic trouble, and even their own papers are now starting to say that a little bit more freely and explicitly. And I don't know, you'd assume that's been allowed by the Kremlin. I would assume it could be a case of just trying to let stuff get out there to normalize the idea that the Russian economy is going to be screwed, so that the people, it's not like we're suddenly crashing, but you let them acclimatize to the ideas, so that then it's not such a bad thing when the full force of this economic collapse might well take place. So this could be a bit of a sort of PR operation. Anyway, Russia's large-scale jamming of GPS signals over the Baltic region is expanding, warns the Lithuanian Vice Minister of National Defense, Karolis Aleksa, in an interview with Delphi. So the Russians are still being buggers in that neck of the woods. Right, NATO summit statement omits Ukraine's entry bid, $40 billion pledge, according to Bloomberg. So there's a omission, like we said earlier, with regard to the G7 communique being controversial. We also have NATO statements are controversial these days because the US has just changed its alignment. One-page draft recognizes Russia as a threat to NATO, but not an aggressor in Ukraine, according to Bloomberg. Frickin', if you can't admit that that Russia are an aggressor in Ukraine, and you're NATO, like, come on, man. Yeah, as someone says, WTF, appalling. But yeah, because the US won't allow any criticism of Russia. It's absolutely appalling. Poland detains a citizen suspected of spying for Russia. According to prosecutors, 28-year-old Victor Z was detained on June 4th by Poland's Internal Security Agency on charges of gathering and passing sensitive information to Russia's intelligence services. This is good news. I say that because I keep saying that the more Russia does stuff that's too obvious or they get found out for. So if they blow up, or that they break an undersea cable, or they're responsible for a cyber attack on a hospital and everyone knows it's Russia, then that's really bad PR. And all the people in that country that might otherwise be sympathetic to Russia's cause suddenly are going to get a bit angry with Russia. So if you are arresting a spy who is actually spying for Russia in Poland, then hopefully that will damage the PR of Russia within Poland, and maybe even people on the Confederation Party who are otherwise quite pro-Russian might go, these guys do suck. The current German ambassador to Ukraine, Martin Jaeger, is about to take over the lead of the BND, Germany's Foreign Intelligence Services. This is not yet officially announced, but the German magazine Der Spiegel reports that the decision has already been made. This is good news. So the ambassador to Ukraine is obviously going to be pretty pro-Ukraine. He's going to know what's going on in Ukraine in the war with Russia, and to then become the lead of the intelligence services, I think that is good news for Ukraine. So that's a good appointment. Now, Defense Minister Boris Pistorius has been in Kiev. That's why we know that Taurus is not on the cards, but another $1.9 billion euros of assistance. I don't know the euros or dollars, including a lot of IRIS-T weaponry. So these are the medium-range surface-to-air missile systems that have been really useful for the Ukrainians. They are part of that 1.9 billion extra. Now, the German spy chief has said Russia no longer believes that NATO's collective defense works and plans to test Article 5. Bruno Karl says Germany's intelligence service has concrete evidence that Moscow wants to see whether the alliance will actually defend its member countries if attacked. Karl warned that Russia's invasion of Ukraine is just one stage on its path westward, and that Moscow wants to push NATO back to the 1990s borders. Earlier, German Defense Minister Pistorius warned that Russia could potentially attack NATO countries by 2029 to 2030. So I think Germany, more than any nation at the moment, is showing that it realizes that Russia is a major threat, is the threat. So that's why you've got Friedrich Merz being very clear-eyed and rhetorically anti-Russia, and more so, I think, than any other European nation at the moment, although, UK and France definitely recognise this as well. The Baltics do and the Nordics do, for sure. What we're missing is the US being a part of this. It's really frustrating because the US are a major component of NATO. NATO is the US thing, really. And it allows the US to have power projection throughout Europe, particularly. And, if NATO's collective defence, Article 5 is seen as impotent by Russia, then the US need to stand up and sit up and take account of that, take notice of that. Now, I talked to you about Friedrich Merz shaking the hand the other day of Putin, Freudian slip, of Trump, and someone's put together loads of weird Trump handshakes. He does this thing for control, but Friedrich Merz the other day, I said, shook his hand and actually brought back control to himself, and I thought it did really well with the handshake. It sounds bizarre, but look what Trump tries to do quite often. So he brings that hand into you. Look what, and the funniest ones are with, and look, there you go. So you've got some really long, weird handshakes between Emmanuel Macron and Trump, where they try and wrest power from each other. But now we have Friedrich Merz taking that hand back and asserting his power there, to the point where Trump then breaks off the handshake really quickly. They're right back again, and then it's over quickly. There you go. It's not some big and pulling Merz towards him. No, Merz owns that. He owns that. That was a good effort from Merz. Anyway, just because I mentioned it the other day, I just thought I'd show you that. Now, Greek Prime Minister Mitsotakis has proposed a 700-kilometre transport corridor linking part of the Alexandroupolis, the port in Greece, to Odessa via Bulgaria and Romania. So the initiative, announced by the Ukraine Southeastern Europe Summit, and that's interesting because it includes Serbia, we're going to come to them, aims to attract EU funding and boost regional connectivity. That will be really good news, and it will help Ukraine, certainly. I don't know how long it will take for that to come about. Now, Russia plans to capture Odessa and then advance to the border with Moldova and Romania, says Zelensky. And I would say that would certainly be something Russia would like to do. The question is, how realistic is that? Now, President of Romania, sticking in that neck of the woods, Nicolae Dan, at the Ukraine Southeastern Europe Summit, so they've had this summit in Odessa, said, quote, Russia is making unreasonable demands, knowing in advance that they cannot be accepted. The only language Russia understands is force. We must do everything we can to help Ukraine negotiate from a position of strength. And that's absolutely right. And to strongly condemn Russia's actions for what they really are, a strategy to stall and undermine the peace process. That, from the new president of Romania, is spot bloody on. Now, I mentioned Serbia. So it's fascinating because President Vučić turned up out the blue to participate in the Ukraine Southeast Europe Summit in Odessa, and it was Vučic's first visit to Ukraine since the full-scale Russian invasion. Now, he's firmly in the sphere of influence of the Kremlin, but he's one of these straddle the fence, try and appease Europe with enough to say that we are still serious about joining the EU, whilst also really being in the Russian orbit. And Vucic sells himself as being this person that's kind of that bridge between the two. Now, Serbia, he says, is ready to restore 1 or 2 Ukrainian cities or regions to clearly demonstrate support to Ukrainians, says President Vucic. So some weird stuff came out of this. Yeah, as someone says, where's the but that follows after that? But, yeah, so I'm not quite sure what went on there, but he did declined to sign the final declaration of the Ukraine Southeastern Europe Summit, which condemns Russia's aggression against Ukraine. He stated that he faced no pressure to sign it, but refused to sign it due to the declaration's call for sanctions against Russia. And of course, sanctions against Russia would mean that they would struggle to do trade with Russia, and they obviously have quite a trade relationship with Russia, one would assume. Now, just hopping over to Hungary from Serbia. I mentioned this morning. I know nothing more about this. I really should look into it. Massive scandal in Hungary, apparently. George Spottel, Orban's best pundit, who has been influencing public opinion for years, has now turned out to be a Russian foreign agent. And his handler is Colonel Oleg Smirnov from the GRU. The Orban regime is not commenting so far. So here you see Spottel with Orban, with Peter Szijjártó, and with other people obviously involved in Hungarian politics. Peter Szijjártó is the foreign minister. Spottel is spreading Russian disinformation and paid by taxpayers' money. He was obviously a Russian agent, although it was an accident how his background came to light with strong evidence. It shows that the Hungarian anti-spy agencies were aware for a long time about this. And this person, Szabadon Magyarul, is demanding, even though our request was rejected many times previously, to make public the possible Russian background of the following pundits. So they're saying actually there are more. Just to make it clear, this is a fact, not a theory. It's being confirmed by the Hungarian Special Services of National Security. You've started to see Hungary pivot a little bit recently, and I don't know what's going on there. It could be Viktor Orban reading the tea leaves. So his polling is bad. The opposition is really good. The opposition seems to be firmly on the side of Ukraine. The EU is pressuring Hungary. It's not doing very well economically. It needs some money released by Europe. And it's getting into a lot of trouble for the continued support of Russia. And I wonder whether they also get a sense that Russia's economy is in trouble. I'm wondering whether Serbia might also have turned up to that Southeastern Summit because they're reading the tea leaves. You know, at the end of the day, you want to back a winner, right? If you're a country, you want to get into bed with a winner because that's going to ensure your prosperity more likely going forward. You know, it's not about morality. It's about geopolitical strategizing. And when you appear to be these countries that are existing more in a moral vacuum, like Hungary geopolitically, and they don't have a problem with Russia, you know, what's going to turn them off supporting Russia? Well, if Russia is failing and if all of their people clearly wants Ukraine to be supported, then you start changing your tune. You might have that in Hungary. I don't know. Putin's puppet kleptocrat, says Yankee, Viktor Orban is getting destroyed in the polls that his own government is doing. So the median poll from June the 3rd to the 5th has ATPGEO, the new party with Peter Magyar, having 10% above Fidesz, which is Orban's own party. Publicis Institute, a little later, has them up 7%, 40 to 33. 21 Research Centre on the 6th to 8th of June, ATPGEO is up 12%, 43 to 31. And the Nezapont Institute, June the 7th to 9th, ATPGEO is up 5%. And that has strong ties to Fidesz and often reports narrower margins. So that's, you know, all the polls are showing that Orban's government is in trouble. The question is, can he rig the elections, or, you know, will the EU have something to say about that? Will the opposition manage to succeed? But there have been protests in Budapest against Orban yesterday, and actually now 2 days ago, with protesters chanting "Russians go home." So Orban's going to know about this. Of course he is. So he's going a solid turnout there apparently for a Tuesday. So he's going to recognise that actually my associations with Russia, the Fidesz government's associations with Russia, could be dangerous going forward. There could be some serious, as I mentioned, tea leaf reading. However, the relationship between Ukraine and Hungary is still very tense. Hungarian government has claimed that Zelensky campaigns for the opposition TISA party and ignores that Ukraine's EU membership isn't among Hungary's national interests. Spokesman Kovacs responded to Zelensky's claim that Orban exploits the war for political gain. The main issue for Orban, says just someone random here, the main issue for Orban is that Hungarians are more supporting the TISA party than his party. More than 40% of Hungarian people are supporting TISA, when not even a third are supporting Fidesz. Orban is pushing propaganda and lies permanently on all media. In Hungary, fact-checking is not allowed. I mean, that fact-checking is legal, but not a single newspaper or media can do it unless to be sure to close in a few weeks because of government making actions against them. So they just report lies, like Viktor Orban said. It is very shocking to read Hungarian newspapers when not trained. So that's someone clearly Hungarian there. So interesting view. Right, moving to Czechia. So the Czech president Petr Pavel has called on the US. So starting to see like Germany and a few nations start to be a little bit more open in their criticisms of the US and Trump. So here, I think there's, you read between the lines. So called on the US to give Europe more time and realistic goals to take care of the continent's security and contain an increasingly aggressive Russia. Pavel said he was disappointed by the reluctance of Trump to show more strength and to clearly designate Russia as an aggressor and Ukraine as the victim. He added that Europe needed USA to step up pressure on the Kremlin through economic sanctions, diplomatic isolation and military deterrence. Exactly, yes. We need to hear this more and more from leaders. Starting to be, I think, more critical of Trump. The problem is you do that too much, it pushes Trump even further towards Russia. And there's this constant desire to have US on board, but to get them on board, you've got to be obsequious and just bootlicking to Trump, it appears. He doesn't respond very well to overt criticisms, but he really needs to be criticized. So, how do you criticize Trump whilst, remaining on good terms with him? Shashank Joshi quotes here the New York Times. China is conducting polygraphs on its agents from Russia as soon as they return home, tightening scrutiny of the 20,000 Russian students in China and trying to recruit Russians with Chinese spouses as potential spies, according to a document. So a secret Russian intelligence document shows deep suspicion of China. So this is a Russian intelligence document. Russia's spy hunters are increasingly worried about China's espionage, even as the two countries grow closer. And of course, BRICS has always been a marriage of convenience. The relationship between China and Russia isn't one of true ideological similarity. It's one of transactionalism for China, even more so than Russia. But actually, Russia has often been, for a long time, has been very, very wary of China. So if you look at where before the war in Ukraine, when they've had to move them all away from there, the air defense systems were lined up on the Chinese border. And you've got territorial disputes still in existence. So the document also shows that Russia is very concerned about how China views the war in Ukraine and is trying to feed Beijing spies with positive information about Russian operations. I absolutely don't doubt that at all. They are going to be doing their absolute level best to keep Russia firmly on side. Okay, that's a lot from me. That's probably enough from me. We'll end that there with China. Sorry it's been so monumental. Take care, and I will speak to you soon.